The royal city gates loomed before Sarah like the jaws of some great beast, ready to devour her whole. At 26, she'd learned that hope was a dangerous thing for an Omega to carry. Yet here she was, clutching it like a lifeline, her worn trunk containing everything she'd ever owned, which was almost nothing. The letter in her pocket had promised salvation. Vincent's words had been honey sweet, speaking of partnership, of building a life together. She'd allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, an Omega from nowhere could find somewhere to belong. What a fool she'd been. Sarah spotted him immediately, tall, impeccably dressed, radiating the casual arrogance of an alpha who'd never known hardship. Vincent's eyes swept over her, and she watched something cold settle in his expression. Disgust, poorly masked. "You're Sarah?" His tone made her name sound like an accusation. She forced a smile, though her stomach was churning. "Vincent, it's wonderful to finally—" "Where's your dowry?" He cut her off, his voice sharp enough to draw stares from nearby travelers. "Your letters mentioned family heirlooms, property in the East. I specifically asked about your financial situation." Heat flooded Sarah's face. "I never claimed to have—" "You let me believe you had something to offer," Vincent hissed, stepping closer, using his alpha presence like a weapon. Sarah felt her Omega instincts screaming at her to submit, to apologize, trying to make herself smaller. "Do you have any idea how this looks? I told my colleagues I was bringing home a bride of quality. Instead, you show up looking like a beggar." Around them, a crowd was gathering. Omegas traveling alone were always spectacles, but a public rejection? This was entertainment. "I have skills," Sarah said, hating how her voice trembled. "I'm a trained healer. I can work, I don't need a servant," Vincent sneered. "I need a wife who can elevate my standing, to the woman I thought you were." To the woman I thought you were. He pulled out a coin purse and threw it at her feet. The coins scattered across the cobblestones. "Consider this charity. Buy yourself passage back to whatever hovel you crawled out of." He turned to leave, but Sarah's desperation made her bold, or stupid. She grabbed his sleeve. "Please, I have nowhere to go. Just give me a chance to—" Vincent spun, his hand connecting with her wrist and wrenching it away with enough force to send her stumbling. She fell, her palms scraping against the rough stone, her trunk spilling open to reveal her pathetic possessions: threadbare clothes, a worn book, a ratty quilt. Laughter erupted from the crowd. "Pathetic," someone muttered. "Did she really think an alpha would want that? Omega trash." Vincent straightened his coat, looking down at her with something worse than hatred. Pity. "Don't contact me again, and don't use my name in this city. I have a reputation to protect." He walked away without looking back. Sarah knelt there on the stones, her hands bleeding, her belongings scattered like garbage, and the jeering crowd closing in around her. A city guard approached, but not to help, to move her along. She was blocking traffic. She was an embarrassment. She was nothing. She gathered her things with shaking hands, shoving them back into her trunk, and stumbled toward a bench at the edge of the square. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as reality set in. She had $17 to her name. No home, no family, no prospects. She'd left the Eastern Territories because there was nothing for her there. An orphanage that had thrown her out at 16, a series of back-breaking jobs that barely kept her fed, a life of pure survival. She'd gambled everything on Vincent's promises, and now she was worse than nothing. She was a public joke. Sarah buried her face in her hands, but she wouldn't cry. Not here. Not where they could see. She'd save her tears for when she was alone, in whatever gutter she'd be sleeping in tonight. That was difficult to watch. The voice was deep, quiet, and carried an authority that made every alpha instinct in her scream danger. Sarah's head snapped up. The man standing before her wasn't just an alpha. He was something more, something primal. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair silver-touched at the temples, he wore simple traveling clothes that couldn't hide the coiled power in his frame. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Steel gray, sharp as blades, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel naked. The air itself seemed to shift around him. Other alphas in the square unconsciously moved away. Even the betas fell silent. "I'm fine," Sarah lied, her voice barely audible. "No," he said simply. "You're not." He moved closer, and Sarah's omega biology betrayed her. A full-body shiver, her scent spiking with fear and something else. Something that made her more afraid than Vincent's cruelty ever had. This man was dangerous. "My name is Cale Thorne." He crouched down so they were eye level, and the gesture somehow made him more terrifying, not less. "And you're going to tell me why that coward thinks he has the right to treat an Omega like property to be discarded." It wasn't a request. Sarah found herself talking about the letters, the promises, the journey, about having nothing and no one, about being so tired of being alone. Cale listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he stood. "You have two options," he said. "I can give you money for the best inn in the city and leave you to figure out your next move alone. Or," his eyes locked onto hers, "you can come with me. I have an estate outside the city. You'll have a roof, food, safety, time to heal and decide what you want to do next." "Why would you help me?" Sarah asked, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Because watching that display made me sick," Kyle said bluntly. "Because you deserve better than dying in some alley. Because a weak alpha couldn't handle his own inadequacy. And because," something flickered in his eyes, "I know what it's like to have nothing left." Sarah looked at him. Really looked. Beneath the power and control there was something hollow. Something broken that he wore like armor. "What's the catch?" she whispered. "No catch. No obligations. No expectations." His voice lowered. "But I won't ask again. I'll decide now." The crowd was still watching. Vincent's laughter still echoed in her ears. And this stranger with storm-colored eyes was offering her an escape. "All right," Sarah said. "I'll go with you." Cale's expression didn't change, but something in his scent shifted. Approval, maybe, or possession. He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing and gestured toward the street. "Stay close." As they walked through the city, Sarah felt the weight of stares. But now they weren't mocking. They were confused, wary. Because Cale moved through the crowd like a king through his court, and everyone instinctively made way. Several alphas started to approach, then thought better of it. A well-dressed merchant called out, "Lord Thorne, I didn't know you'd return to the city." "Not now," Cale said without looking, and the merchant immediately fell silent. Lord Thorne? They reached a carriage, black, elegant, and with horses that looked like they cost more than Sarah had earned in her entire life. Cale helped her inside with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the cold authority he'd shown everyone else. As the carriage rolled out of the city, Sarah sat in silence, trying to process everything. Finally, she couldn't hold back. "Who are you really?" Cale glanced at her, and for a moment she thought he might not answer, as then, "Someone who understands what it's like to be destroyed by this world." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." The countryside unfurled before them, rolling hills, dense forests. Beautiful and isolated. They traveled for over an hour in silence before Cale finally spoke again. "That man, Vincent. He humiliated you in public, made you bleed, made you into entertainment." His hands tightened on the reins. "Does he do that often?" Target desperate Omegas with false promises? I don't know, Sarah admitted. Maybe I'm just the unlucky one. You're not unlucky. Kyle's voice was hard. You're brave. Stupid, maybe, to trust a letter from a stranger. But brave. Bravery didn't get me very far. No, but it got you away from whatever hell you were living in before. He looked at her directly. And it brought you to me. There was something in those words, something weighted and dangerous, that made Sarah's breath catch. As the sun began to set, they crested a hill, and Sarah saw it, a sprawling manor of dark stone, surrounded by forest like a fortress. Thornwood Manor. It looked less like a home and more like something from a darker fairy tale. It's... Sarah searched for words. Forbidding, Cale supplied. Yes, but it's safe. No one comes here uninvited. As they approached, Sarah noticed something odd. Guards positioned at intervals, watching the forest. This wasn't just a wealthy estate. This was something else entirely. A graying man emerged from the stable, his eyes widening when he saw Cale. My lord, we didn't expect you back so soon. He stopped when he saw Sarah, and his expression shifted to carefully controlled curiosity. Marcus, Miss Sarah Ashwood will be staying with us. Prepare the East Wing guest room. The East Wing, my lord? Marcus's surprise was evident. That clearly meant something. Yes. Of course. Marcus bowed to Sarah. Welcome to Thornwood. Wa miss. Cale led Sarah inside, and she felt the weight of the place settle over her. High ceilings, dark wood, tapestries depicting hunts and battles. A massive hearth with a fire already burning. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Everything here felt like Cale, powerful, controlled, and hiding something violent beneath the surface. He led her upstairs to a room that was far more luxurious than anywhere she'd ever stayed. A 4-poster bed with rich fabrics. A window overlooking the forest, a basin of clean water. Rest, Cale said. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. He moved to leave, but Sarah's voice stopped him. Kyle, thank you. For seeing me. When everyone else just saw garbage. He turned, and the look in his eyes made her heart stutter. Something fierce and almost angry. Anyone who looks at you and sees garbage is blind, he said roughly, Vincent included. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning. She'd escaped one nightmare and walked straight into another mystery. What had she just agreed to? And why did part of her not care, as long as Cale kept looking at her like she mattered? Part 2. The beast beneath Sarah woke to screaming. For a disoriented moment she thought it was her own voice. Then she realized the sound was coming from outside, animal, raw, full of rage. It was vicious enough to send splinters flying. His back was a canvas of scars, some old, some relatively fresh. Marcus stood nearby, watching with the patience of someone who'd seen this before. Sarah couldn't look away. This wasn't the controlled man who'd saved her. This was something else, something wild and barely leashed, where Cale landed a final, devastating blow that sent the dummy's head flying. He stood there, chest heaving, and then his eyes lifted, directly to her window. Even from this distance, the intensity of his gaze made her stumble back. When she came down for breakfast an hour later, Cale was at the table, fully dressed, perfectly composed. As if she'd imagined the violence she'd witnessed. Good morning, he said calmly. Did you sleep well? I heard you training, Sarah said carefully. He didn't apologize or explain. Just poured her tea. I have restless mornings sometimes. Marcus entered with food, and they ate in charged silence. Sarah kept stealing glances at Kyle, trying to reconcile the courteous host with the man who'd destroyed that dummy like it had personally wronged him. Tell me about your healing work, Kale said suddenly. You said you were trained. Sarah explained her apprenticeship with old healer Mareth, how she'd learned to treat wounds, mix salves, you'll ease pain. How it had been the only thing that made her feel useful. Show me, Kale said. He stood and pulled up his sleeve, revealing an angry red cut on his forearm. Fresh, from this morning's training. You're hurt, Sarah said, immediately moving closer. It's nothing. It could get infected. She examined the wound, her healer's instincts taking over. You need to be more careful. Careful isn't really my nature, Kale said, but he let her clean and dress the wound, in on her face, studying her. You're good at the task, but she was hyper-aware of his eyes on her face, studying her. You're good at this, he said quietly. It's one of the few things I know I'm good at. I doubt that's true. Sarah's hands stilled. When she looked up, Kale's face was inches from hers. Close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, feel his breath against her skin. You survived, he said. That alone makes you extraordinary. The air between them felt electric, dangerous. Sarah's heart was pounding, and she knew he could hear it, could probably scent her omega biology responding to his proximity. She forced herself to step back, to finish tying the bandage. There. Try not to destroy any more training dummies for a few days. Kale's mouth quirked. No promises. Over the following days, Sarah settled into a strange new rhythm. She explored the grounds, helped in the kitchen, tended to the small herb garden. Thornwood was beautiful in a wild way, but it was also undeniably isolated. The servants were few and fiercely loyal to Kyle. They treated Sarah with respect, but also curiosity, as if trying to figure out what exactly she was doing here. And Kyle? Kale was a study in contradictions. During meals, he was thoughtful and engaging, asking about her day, her thoughts. He recommended books from his extensive library. He made sure she had everything she needed. But there were also the mornings when she'd hear him in the training yard, working out whatever demons haunted him with brutal physicality. The evenings when he'd disappear into his study and not emerge for hours. The way he'd sometimes look at her with such intensity that she felt pinned in place. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Sarah finally asked, "Why did you really bring me here?" Kale was quiet for a long moment. "Because I saw myself in you." "What do you mean?" "Broken. You alone. One more disappointment away from giving up entirely." He stared into the flames. 3 years ago, I had everything. A mate I loved more than life. A purpose. A future. His voice hardened. Then she got sick, and I watched her die slowly, painfully, while I was powerless to stop it. "Liana," Sarah whispered, remembering him mentioning her before. "Yes, Liana." He said her name like a prayer and a curse. She made me promise at the end that I wouldn't let grief destroy me. He asked that I'd find a way to live again. A bitter laugh. I've done a spectacular job of honoring that promise. Sarah moved closer, drawn by his pain. "You're still here. That counts for something." "I'm here," Kyle agreed. "But I'm not living. I'm just existing. Waiting for something to either end me or give me a reason to keep going." His eyes met hers. "Then I saw you in that square, and I thought, here's someone who refuses to quit, even when the world is actively trying to crush her. And I wondered what it would feel like to fight that hard again." "I didn't refuse to quit," Sarah said honestly. "I just didn't know how." "Same thing." They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I was 10 when my parents died. A farming accident. After that, it was the orphanage, and that was hard. The matrons weren't kind. The other children could be cruel. Omegas are treated like commodities, you know. Like we're only valuable for what we can give." She pulled her knees up to her chest. When I was 16, they kicked me out. Said I was too old to stay. I found work with healer Mareth, but she died 2 years ago, and her son didn't want me around. After that, it was just a series of terrible jobs in terrible places, with terrible people. I was so tired of being hungry. Tired of being afraid. She trailed off, unable to finish. Cale's jaw tightened. Did anyone ever— No, Sarah said quickly. No, I managed to avoid that. But there were close calls, scary moments, times when I thought— She shuddered. Vincent seemed safe. Boring, maybe, but safe. A chance at a normal life. There's no such thing as a normal life, Cale said. Just different brands of chaos. Despite everything, Sarah laughed. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, it's supposed to be honest. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and the gentleness of the gesture contrasted so sharply with the violence she'd seen in him that Sarah's breath caught. You're safe here, Cale said quietly. Whatever else happens, I want you to know that. No one will hurt you at Thornwood, not while I'm alive to prevent it. It wasn't a promise. It was a vow. And something in Sarah's chest cracked open at the absolute certainty in his voice. Thank you, she whispered. They stayed like that, close enough to touch but not quite touching, until the fire burned low and the moon rose high outside the windows. Neither wanted to break the moment. Neither wanted to acknowledge what was growing between them, dangerous and inevitable as a storm. Some Part 3. When lightning strikes. The crash came at midnight. Sarah bolted upright in bed, heart hammering, glass shattering, shouting. The clash of steel. She grabbed her robe and ran into the hallway. Marcus was there, armed with a sword, his face grim. Get back in your room, he barked. What's happening? Intruders. Mercenaries by the look of them. My lord is— Another crash, this time closer. Then Cale's voice, cold and lethal. I'm going to ask one more time. Who sent you? Sarah couldn't help herself. She pushed past Marcus and looked down into the great hall. 3 men were there, armed, dangerous looking, and Cale, standing between them and the staircase, looking like death incarnate. One of the mercenaries lunged. Kyle moved with impossible speed, disarming the man and sending him crashing into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. The Omega, one of the others said, eyes darting upward. Sarah realized with horror that he was looking at her. Vincent paid us to bring her back. Said she stole from him. Vincent, Cale repeated, his voice dropping to something inhuman. You're telling me Vincent sent you to my home to kidnap an Omega under my protection? We didn't know she was yours, my lord, the mercenary said quickly. We thought— Kyle moved. One moment he was standing still. The next he had the man by the throat, lifting him off the ground. You thought you could come into my home, threaten someone I've claimed sanctuary for, and walk out alive? The man choked, clawing at Cale's hand. The other mercenary tried to intervene, but Marcus was there, sword point at his throat. Please, the mercenary gasped. We'll leave. We'll tell Vincent. You'll tell Vincent that if he ever speaks Sarah's name again, I'll personally remove his tongue. Cal threw the man down. You'll tell him that she's under the protection of the crown, us, and that the next person who comes for her won't leave here breathing. Do you understand? The crown? The mercenaries scrambled to their feet, terror written across their faces. They fled out the broken door without another word. Silence fell. Kyle stood there, chest heaving, knuckles bleeding. When he looked up at Sarah, his eyes were wild, more animal than man. Are you hurt? He demanded. No, Did they touch you? No, Kyle. I'm fine. He was up the stairs in seconds. Them. They came for you, he said them. They came for you, he said roughly. In my home. My home. Because that coward couldn't accept being refused. What did you mean by protection of the crown? Sarah asked. Cale's hands dropped. He stepped back and suddenly he looked exhausted. Marcus, have the guards doubled. If anyone else comes looking for trouble, I want them stopped at the border of the property. Yes, my lord. Cale looked at Sarah. We need to talk. My study. Now. It wasn't a request. Sarah followed him through the manor to a room she hadn't seen before. All dark wood, maps on the walls, weapons displayed. A warrior's space. Cale poured himself a drink and downed it in one go. I haven't been entirely honest with you, he said, clearly. My father was King Aldrich Thorn. When he died 3 years ago, the crown passed to me. He turned to face her. I am the Alpha King, and I've been hiding from that responsibility in this manner because I couldn't bear to face a court that reminded me of everything I lost. Sarah felt the room spin. You're the king? Yes. And you let me call you just Kyle. You let me think you were... What? A reclusive lord? He laughed bitterly. That's all I've been for 3 years. A king in name only. You letting my council run the kingdom while I rotted away in grief. Why tell me now? Because Vincent just declared war without knowing it. Cale's voice was hard. He sent mercenaries after someone under my protection. That's an act of aggression against the crown. I could have him executed for that. You can't. Oh, I can. And part of me wants to. He met her eyes. But more than that, I want him to understand what he threw away. I want him to see you rise so far above him that he chokes on his own inadequacy. How? Sarah whispered. Cale crossed the room, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Let me present you at court, he said. Not as a discarded Omega. As someone under royal protection. Let me show that entire city what happens when you disrespect someone I've claimed. Claimed? The word made something hot coil in Sarah's stomach. Yes. His voice lowered. You've been mine since the moment I saw you bleeding on those cobblestones and wanted to burn the city down for allowing it. Sarah's breath caught. Cale. I know it's insane. I know it's too fast. I know I have no right to feel this way about someone I've known for less than a month. His hand came up to cup her face. But I can't help it. You walked into my life and made me feel something other than rage and grief for the first time in 3 years. And now some insignificant alpha thinks he can take you from me? He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. Let me protect you. Let me show you what it means to be treasured instead of discarded. And let me make Vincent regret every second of his miserable existence. Sarah knew she should say no. This was too much, too fast, too dangerous. She barely knew this man. He was the king, and she was nobody. But when she looked into his storm-gray eyes, she saw the same desperate need for connection that kept her awake at night. The same loneliness, the same hunger for something real. Okay, she whispered. Show me. Kyle's eyes blazed. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. There's my brave girl. Before Sarah could respond, he closed the distance between them and kissed her. It wasn't gentle, yet it was possession and promise, and 3 years of pent-up need all crashing together at once. His hands slid into her hair, tilting her head back, and Sarah gasped against his mouth. She'd been kissed before, clumsy attempts by boys who didn't matter. This was something else entirely. This was being consumed. When Cale finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I should apologize for that, he said roughly. Don't you dare. His eyes darkened. Sarah, if we do this, if we walk into that court together, there's no going back. You'll be mine in everyone's eyes. And He swallowed hard. I don't share. I don't want you to, Sarah said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Cale pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in. Then we go to war tomorrow, he murmured, "and we make them all remember what happens when they underestimate an Omega." Sarah clung to him, her heart racing, like she'd come to the royal city looking for safety, and found a storm instead. But maybe that's what she'd needed all along. Not safety, but someone willing to burn the world down for her. Part 4. The Queen of Ashes. The royal court hadn't seen their king in 3 years. When Cale Thorne walked through those doors with an Omega on his arm, it caused a sensation. Sarah had spent a week preparing for this moment, where Cale's staff had dressed her in a gown of deep emerald that made her amber eyes glow. Silk and velvet, fitted perfectly, with a neckline that was modest, but commanding. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo, and around her neck hung a necklace of diamonds and silver. She looked like someone important. She felt like a fraud. "Breathe," Kyle murmured beside her. See, he wore his crown, dark metal and brutal in its simplicity, and formal court attire that made him look every inch the warrior king he was. "You belong here more than any of them." "I'm going to vomit on a noble. Please don't. I just had these floors redone." Despite herself, Sarah laughed. The sound made Cale's expression soften, just for a moment before his court mask slipped back into place. The throne room was massive, soaring ceilings, stained glass windows, hundreds of courtiers all watching their entrance with barely concealed shock. And there, near the front, was Vincent. His face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, recognition, horror, and finally pale terror, as he realized exactly who Sarah was standing beside. Cale led her straight to the throne dais. But instead of sitting, he turned to address the court. 3 years ago, I retreated from this place, his voice carried to every corner of the room, powerful and absolute. I let grief consume me. I abandoned my duties. For that, I apologize to those who serve this kingdom faithfully. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But my absence ends today, and I return with someone who reminded me what it means to fight, to survive, to refuse to be broken. He looked at Sarah. Miss Sarah Ashwood has accepted my offer of royal protection. She is to be treated with the respect due to someone in my personal care. Anyone who challenges this will answer to me directly. The court erupted in whispers. Kyle raised his hand and silence fell instantly. Furthermore, it has come to my attention that certain individuals have been using courtship letters to lure Omegas from the territories under false pretenses, then discarding them publicly when they arrive without sufficient dowries. Vincent had gone white as snow. This practice ends now. Anyone found engaging in such behavior will face charges of fraud and exploitation. Kyle's eyes found Vincent in the crowd. Those who have already committed such acts have one chance to make reparations to their victims. One chance. It was a warning and a threat rolled into one. The court session continued with various administrative matters, but Sarah barely processed them. She sat in the chair Cale had placed beside the throne, not on it, but near enough to make a statement, and she was under the king's protection. She was important. After the session ended, the real torture began, courtiers approaching to introduce themselves, to curry favor, to assess this Omega who'd somehow captured their reclusive king's attention. Most were polite, if curious. A few were openly hostile, particularly the alpha nobles who'd been vying to marry off their daughters to the widowed king. Lady Cassandra, a stunning alpha with ice-blonde hair, made her disdain clear. "How fascinating," she purred, looking Sarah up and down. "I didn't realize His Majesty was in the habit of collecting strays." "I didn't realize you were in the habit of being rude," Sarah replied evenly. Cassandra's eyes flashed. "Careful, Omega. Court politics can be treacherous for those who don't understand the rules." "Then it's fortunate I have an excellent teacher in how to identify threats," Sarah said, her voice sweet as poison. "You've been very educational." Before Cassandra could respond, Kyle appeared at Sarah's side. "Lady Cassandra," he said coldly, "I believe your father is looking for you." It was a dismissal. Cassandra had no choice but to curtsy and retreat, though her expression promised future trouble. "You handled that well," Kyle said quietly. "I've dealt with worse," Sarah replied. "At least she can't actually hit me here. If she tries, I'll remove her hand." He said it so calmly that it took Sarah a moment to realize he wasn't joking. Vincent approached nervously, flanked by 2 other alphas, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Your Majesty," Vincent said, bowing low, "I wanted to apologize for any misunderstanding that may have occurred." "Misunderstanding," Cale repeated flatly. "I didn't realize Miss Ashwood was... that is, I had no idea she was important to..." "She was always important," Cale cut him off. "You were just too shallow to see it. And your misunderstanding included sending mercenaries to my home to kidnap her. Care to explain that?" Vincent's face went from white to green. "I merely wanted to recoup my expenses from the courtship letters. I thought if she could work off..." "Stop talking," Cale said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Before you say something that requires me to have you arrested. Please, Your Majesty. I was foolish, but I meant no real harm." Cale stepped forward, and Vincent instinctively stepped back. "You publicly humiliated an Omega who came to you in good faith. You threw coins at her feet like she was a beggar. You had her assaulted. Yes, pushing her down counts as assault. Then you sent armed men to retrieve her like she was stolen property." His voice rose, making everyone nearby freeze. "You are everything wrong with the alphas of this court. You value status over character, appearance over substance. You wouldn't recognize genuine worth if it spat in your face." He turned to his guards. "Escort Mr. Vincent to the treasury. He will liquidate assets until he has enough to pay Miss Ashwood 50,000 gold. Compensation for fraud, emotional distress, and being subjected to his presence." Vincent's jaw dropped. 50,000, that's everything I have." "Then you should have thought of that before you sent mercenaries to kidnap someone under royal protection. I'd be grateful I'm not having you executed." Cale's smile was sharp enough to cut. "You're dismissed." As the guards led a sputtering Vincent away, the crowd erupted in excited whispers. Sarah stood frozen, barely believing what had just happened. Kyle turned to her. "Too much?" He's going to be bankrupt. Yes. Because of me. Because of his own choices." Cale's expression softened. "You don't owe him mercy, Sarah. He certainly showed you none." "I don't know what to do with this," Sarah admitted. "Yesterday I was nobody. Today you're bankrupting nobles in my name." "Get used to it," Cale said. "This is what it means to be mine. I don't do anything halfway." That intensity was back in his eyes, the storm she was beginning to recognize as want and possession, and something fiercer. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. "What?" "Dance with me, right now. Let them all see." Music had started in the adjoining ballroom. Kyle offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah took it. He led her to the dance floor, and the moment his arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close, the room fell silent. The king was dancing. For the first time since his mate's death, he was dancing. And he was looking at his partner like she was the only person in the world. "Everyone's staring," Sarah whispered. "Let them," Kyle murmured, spinning her. "Let them see what it looks like when an alpha actually values his omega." "I'm not yours," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Not yet," Cale agreed. "But you will be." It wasn't a question or a hope. It was a certainty. They danced for 3 songs, and by the end half the court was openly gossiping about the king's mysterious omega. When the final note faded, Cale tilted Sarah's chin up. "Last chance to run," he said quietly. "After this, ask what he meant." Cale leaned down and asked what he meant. Cale leaned down and kissed her. Not a polite court kiss. Acclaiming. The ballroom exploded in scandalized gasps and excited whispers. When Cale finally pulled back, Sarah was breathless and blushing furiously. "You just kissed me in front of the entire court," she managed. "Yes. They're going to talk. Yes. You might have to marry me now, for propriety's sake." Cale's smile was sharp and satisfied. That was rather the point, my clever little Omega. Sarah's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me," Cale said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Not because of propriety or scandal or politics. Marry me because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for, someone worth living for. And marry me because in 3 weeks you've made me feel more alive than I've felt in 3 years. Kyle, this is insane. Yes, do it anyway. We barely know each other. I know enough. I know you're brave and kind and strong enough to survive things that would break weaker people. I know you make me laugh. I know I'd kill anyone who tried to hurt you. I know that when I imagine the future, you're in it." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I know this is fast. I know it's not rational. Let me spend the rest of my life proving. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that Vincent was the biggest fool to ever draw breath." The entire ballroom had gone silent, waiting for her answer. Sarah looked into Kyle's storm-gray eyes and saw absolute certainty. No doubts, no reservations. Just pure, terrifying conviction. This man was chaos and control, violence and gentleness, darkness and light. He'd saved her from humiliation and then proceeded to demolish her entire understanding of what her life could be. He was offering her a crown and calling it secondary to the offer of his heart. It was insane. It was reckless. It was everything she'd never known she wanted. "Yes," Sarah whispered, then louder. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cale's answering smile was blinding. He swept her into his arms, lifted her right there in the middle of the ballroom, and spun her around while the court erupted in chaos around them. Later, Sarah would remember this as the moment everything changed. Not when Vincent rejected her, not when Cale saved her, but here, when she chose him back, when she decided that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be chosen too. And if that meant becoming a queen in the process, well, stranger things had happened, though probably not to orphaned Omegas from the Eastern Territories. Probably. To Part 5, Trial by Fire. The engagement announcement sent shockwaves through the kingdom. Within days, Thornwood Manor, now the official royal residence since Cale refused to stay in the palace without Sarah beside him, was flooded with guests, gifts, and problems. The council was in an uproar. Half believed Cale had lost his mind. The other half were busy calculating political advantages. "You can't marry an Omega with no family connections," Chancellor Aldrich insisted during a particularly heated council meeting. "The nobility will revolt." "Let them try," Cale said coldly. "I'll deal with revolts the same way I deal with all threats to my mate, swiftly and permanently." Sarah sat beside him, not quite on the throne, but close enough to make her position clear. She'd insisted on attending the council meetings, much to the horror of several old guard nobles. Your Majesty," Lady Meredith, the eldest council member, spoke with careful diplomacy. "We understand your attachment, but there are protocols. A royal wedding requires—" "I'm aware of the protocols," Cale interrupted, "and I'm following the only one that matters. The king's choice is absolute." "The people expect a grand wedding," another counselor argued. "Months of preparation, foreign dignitaries invited. Then they'll be disappointed," Cale said. "We're marrying within the month." "Anyone who has a problem with that can address their complaints to me personally." The threat was clear in his voice. After the council meeting, Sarah followed Kyle to his private study. "You're making enemies," she said quietly. "I've had enemies my entire life." He poured them both wine. At least now they're enemies worth having. "They're not wrong about the politics, though. I'm nobody, Cale. Marrying me doesn't strengthen your position." Kale set down his glass and pulled her close. You want to know what strengthens my position? Being a king who gives a damn again. Being someone the people can look at and think, he fought his way back from grief. Maybe I can too. His forehead touched hers. You make me a better king, Sarah. Everything else is noise. What if I can't do this? She whispered. What if I'm terrible at being queen? Then you'll be terrible at it together with me. He smiled. I'm not exactly winning any awards for most functional monarch. Despite everything, Sarah laughed, but her worries weren't unfounded. The court was brutal. Every dress she wore was critiqued. Every word she spoke was analyzed. Lady Cassandra led a faction of alphas who made their disdain for the upstart Omega perfectly clear. Anonymous letters arrived daily, some praising Kale's choice, others viciously attacking Sarah's character, her background, her worth. One morning, in the ruined fabric, tears streaming down the ruined fabric, tears streaming down her face. I'll find who did this, he said grimly. No, Sarah said. It'll just make things worse. My lady? I'm not a lady, she said bitterly. I'm an Omega who got lucky, everyone knows it. Marcus crouched down so they were eye level. You're wrong, he said firmly. You're an Omega who survived hell and still has the courage to walk into a nest of vipers every day with her head held high. That's not luck. That's strength. It doesn't feel like strength. It never does from the inside. He stood. But I'll tell you what I told His Majesty 3 years ago when he wanted to give up. The people who want you to fail aren't worth your tears. Save those for the people who matter. After Marcus left, Sarah cleaned up the destroyed dress and went to the gardens. She needed space to breathe. To think. She found Kale there, in the memorial garden where Lyanna was remembered. He was talking quietly to the headstone, as he did sometimes. Sarah started to turn away, but Kyle called out, Stay! She approached slowly. Kyle gestured to the space beside him, and she sat. I was telling her about you, he said. About how you've been dealing with the court. Lyanna and I were first together. The court tried to break her, too. She was from a minor noble family. Good blood, but no real power. They called her a social climber. Said I was wasting the crown on someone insignificant. What did she do? She smiled at them, Kale said. She was kind when they were cruel. She worked twice as hard as anyone expected. And slowly, over time, they realized they'd misjudged her. By the time she died, half the court mourned her like she was their own daughter. He turned to Sarah. You remind me of her sometimes. That core of steel wrapped in gentleness. That refusal to let the world make you bitter. I don't feel like her, Sarah said. I feel like I'm drowning. Then let me be your heir. He pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her, and Sarah finally let herself break. She cried for the destroyed dress, for the cruel letters, for the constant feeling of being inadequate. She cried for the girl she'd been, alone and unwanted, and the woman she was trying to become. Kyle held her through it all, murmuring reassurances, his presence solid and unshakable. When she finally calmed, he tipped her face up. Listen to me, he said intently. You are not inadequate. You are not unworthy. You are the woman I chose to face the rest of my life beside. And anyone who can't see your value is beneath our notice. They destroyed my dress, Sarah said quietly. What? She explained, and she watched Kale's expression shift from concern to fury. Show me, he demanded. They went back to her room, and Kale stared at the shredded fabric. His jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. I want a list of everyone who had access to this room today, he told the guard outside. And I want it within the hour. Kyle, don't tell me not to, he said, his voice dangerous. Someone came into your room, your sanctuary, and destroyed something that mattered to you. That's not politics. That's warfare. Within 2 hours, the culprit was identified, one of Lady Cassandra's handmaids. Cale personally conducted the interrogation. The girl confessed immediately, terrified, claiming she'd been ordered to send a message to the Omega about knowing her place. Exile, Cale decided coldly. Her and anyone else involved. They're stripped of positions and removed from court lands. Your Majesty, that's extreme, Chancellor Aldrich began. You're right, Cale agreed. Execution would be more appropriate for assault on the king's intended mate. The Chancellor paled. But I'm feeling merciful today, Cale continued. Exile it is, and Lady Cassandra will personally apologize to Sarah and pay restitution for the destroyed property. Publicly. She'll never agree. Then she can join her handmaid in exile. Cale's voice was steel. Her choice. The next day, Lady Cassandra stood before Sarah in the throne room and delivered the most insincere apology in the history of royal court. But she delivered it, and every noble watching understood the message. The king was done tolerating disrespect toward his Omega. After the apology, Sarah felt different eyes on her, still calculating, still assessing, but with a new wariness. She wasn't just the king's charity case, she was the king's obsession, and that made her dangerous. Part 6, Inferno. The wedding was 3 days away when the assassination attempt happened. Sarah was in the manor gardens, reviewing seating arrangements with the wedding coordinator, when the first arrow struck. It missed her by inches, embedding in the tree behind her with a solid thunk. The coordinator screamed. Sarah dove behind a stone bench as 2 more arrows followed, where guards poured into the garden, surrounding her, but the attackers were already gone, vanished into the forest that bordered the property. Cale arrived within minutes, his face a mask of cold rage. Are you hurt? He ran his hands over her, checking for wounds. I'm fine. They missed. They missed, Cale repeated, his voice shaking. They got close enough to try. He turned to his captain of the guard. Lock down the entire estate. No one in or out. I want those assassins found and brought to me alive. Do you understand? Alive. The venom in his voice made the captain nod quickly and retreat. Kyle pulled Sarah against him, his arms like iron bands. I almost lost you, he said roughly. Someone tried to take you from me. But they didn't, Sarah said, trying to calm him. I'm right here. Not good enough. He pulled back, his eyes wild. I'm moving the wedding up. Tomorrow. No more waiting. I'm no more giving our enemies time to strike. Cale, tomorrow, Sarah. His voice broke. I need you to be mine in every way that matters. I need the protection that comes with you being queen. He stopped, struggling for words. I need to know that if something happens to me, you're protected. That you can't be hurt, or exiled, or destroyed because of your connection to me. Sarah realized he was afraid. Genuinely, deeply afraid. Okay, she said softly. Tomorrow. That night, they held an emergency council meeting. The assassins had been caught. Mercenaries again, hired through a middleman. The trail led back to a faction of nobles opposed to the Omega Queen. This is exactly what we warned you about, Chancellor Aldrich said. The nobility is fractured. Half support you, half want a different heir. Marrying her makes you vulnerable. One more word, Cale said dangerously, and I'll have you removed from this council. Your Majesty. Sarah is not the problem. Moves against her is moving against me. So let me be perfectly clear. Anyone who moves against her is moving against me. Anyone who harms her will die. Anyone who plots against her will die. Anyone who so much as speaks her name with disrespect will wish they'd died. The council sat in stunned silence. The wedding is tomorrow, Cale continued. Small ceremony, essential guests only. And after that, We're cleaning house. Every noble who's been stirring up dissent will be investigated. Those found complicit in today's attack will face treason charges. You'll start a civil war, someone warned. Then let it start, Kyle said coldly. I've been too lenient, too willing to let the old guard pretend they have power over me. That ends now. After the meeting, Sarah found Cale in his study, drinking heavily. You can't execute half the nobility, she said. Watch me. Kyle. She took the bottle from his hand. This isn't you. You don't know what I'm capable of, he said harshly. You've seen the controlled version, the one trying to be civilized, but underneath? He looked at her with haunted eyes. I'm my father's son, and he was a monster when threatened. Then don't be like him, Sarah said firmly. Be better. I can't be better when you're in danger, when people are literally trying to kill you because of me. So we fight smarter, us not harder. Sarah sat beside him. We win over the nobles we can. We neutralize the ones we can't. But we don't burn the kingdom down in the process. You're asking me to be rational when someone shot arrows at you. Yes. Cale pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I can't lose you, he said, muffled. Losing Leanna almost broke me. Losing you would finish the job. You won't lose me, Sarah promised. I'm harder to kill than I look. You better be. 'Twas part 7, the coronation. They married at the end of the day. Part 7, the coronation. They married at dawn in the memorial garden beneath Leanna's oak. It was small, just Marcus, the captain of the guard, the priest, and a handful of trusted servants. Sarah wore a simple white dress, hastily altered from her mourning gowns. No veil, no ceremony. Grief and in joy. In darkness and in grief and in joy. In darkness and in light. I swear to protect you, to cherish you, and to burn down anyone who threatens you. The priest coughed delicately. That's not the traditional vow, Your Majesty. It's mine, Cale said, not taking his eyes off Sarah. Sarah smiled through her tears. I, Sarah Ashwood, take you, Cale Thorne, as my mate. In fear and in courage, in doubt and in certainty. I swear to stand beside you, to challenge you, and to remind you who you are when you forget. Also not traditional, the priest noted. Good, Sarah said. They exchanged rings, simple bands of gold, engraved with words only they would see. My fierce heart on Sarah's, my anchor on Cale's. When the priest pronounced them mated, Cale kissed her like he was drowning, and she was air. The small group applauded. And Marcus looked suspiciously misty-eyed. But the ceremony was only the beginning. That afternoon, the formal court announcement was made. By evening, Sarah stood in the throne room, surrounded by hundreds of nobles, as the crown was placed on her head. Not a delicate circlet. A real crown. Heavy, ornate, unmistakable in its authority. Cale stood beside her, his hand covering hers on the throne's armrest. People of the realm, the herald announced. I present to you Queen Sarah Thorne, smate to the Alpha King, protector of the realm, and voice of the throne. The court erupted in applause, some genuine, some forced, but everyone applauded. Because not doing so would be treason. After the ceremony, there was a feast. Music and dancing and nobles trying to ingratiate themselves with the new queen. Sarah played her part, gracious and regal and every inch the Queen Cale believed she could be. But inside, she was still the frightened Omega who'd been humiliated in a public square. So late that night, after the last guest had left, Sarah stood on the balcony of their shared chambers, staring out at the city. Cale came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Having second thoughts? He asked. 1,000 of them, Sarah admitted. But none that would make me walk away. Good, because I'm not letting you go. I noticed. She turned in his arms. You bankrupted Vincent. Exiled nobles who insulted me. Threatened civil war. All for an Omega you've known less than 2 months. Your point? My point is, Sarah paused. Why me? Really, I need to understand. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. When Lyanna died, he finally said, I wanted to die too. Not dramatically. Not immediately. But I stopped caring about living. I went through the motions, ruled, trained, existed. But I was hollow. He cupped her face. Then I saw you in that square, bleeding and broken, and something in me woke up. Odd because you'd been broken too, but you were still standing, still trying. And I thought, if this Omega can refuse to quit after everything she's been through, maybe I can too. That's not love, Sarah whispered. That's inspiration. No, Cale agreed. That was recognition. The love came after. It came when you made me laugh, when you refused to let me wallow, when you risked yourself to save Lyanna's portrait from the fire, when you bandaged my wounds and told me to be more careful, like you had any authority over the king. He smiled. The love came when I realized that thinking about you made me want to see tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of my life. Sarah felt tears spill over. I love you too, she said. Even though you're terrifying and dramatic and absolutely insane. Especially because I'm terrifying and dramatic and absolutely insane, Cale corrected. He lifted her into his arms and carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. Whatever came next, court politics, assassination attempts, civil unrest, they'd face it together. Because they were mated now. Bound. Inseparable. And anyone who tried to tear them apart would learn exactly how far a king would go for his queen, and how far a queen would go for her king. Epilogue. Empire of Ash and Gold. 6 months after the wedding, Queen Sarah stood in the throne room, flanked by guards, as the last of the conspirators were sentenced. 17 nobles had been involved in the assassination plot. 17 families who'd bet on the wrong side of history. Kyle had wanted executions. Sarah had negotiated for exile and asset forfeiture instead, stripping them of power but leaving them their lives. It was a compromise that satisfied neither the king's rage nor the noble's sense of victimhood, which made it perfect. You're getting better at this, Cale murmured after the sentencing. Playing the merciful queen. Someone has to balance out your burn everything approach, Sarah replied. True. He pulled her close, though I maintain that my approach is more satisfying. The court had settled into an uneasy peace. Sarah had won over enough key families through a combination of intelligence, compassion, and strategic alliance building that open rebellion was no longer viable. Those who still hated her had learned to hide it better. Vincent had disappeared, bankrupt and disgraced. He'd left the royal city and hadn't been heard from since. Sarah didn't think about him often anymore. He was a footnote in someone else's tragedy. The real story was what she and Kyle had built. A partnership that shocked the kingdom with its intensity. A love that had started in ashes and grown into something unshakable. They fought, of course, passionately and often. Kyle was still prone to dramatic gestures and overprotective rages. Sarah still challenged him at every turn, refusing to be just a decorative queen. But they always came back together. Always. One evening, as they sat in the memorial garden, their favorite place, Sarah spoke the words she'd been holding for weeks. I'm pregnant. Cale went very still. What? I'm pregnant. About 3 months along, the healers think. For a long moment, Cale just stared at her. Then he dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead against her stomach. A baby, he whispered. We're having a baby. Are you okay? Sarah asked, running her fingers through his hair. I'm terrified, he admitted, and so happy I can barely breathe, and already planning how to protect them from everything. They'll be fine. Sarah assured him. "They'll have you as a father, and me as a mother, and an entire kingdom that knows what happens when you threaten a thorn." Cale looked up at her, his eyes wet. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked. "You didn't," Sarah said gently. "You saw a broken Omega and decided she was worth saving. You fought for me when no one else would. You made me believe I could be more than what the world told me I was." She knelt down to his level. "We saved each other, Kyle. That's not luck. That's choice." He kissed her then, soft and reverent, so different from the desperate claiming kisses they'd shared in the beginning. This was a promise, a future, a family. When they pulled apart, Sarah looked toward Leanna's memorial. "She'd be happy for you," she said quietly. "For us." "I know," Kyle replied. "I told her about the baby yesterday. I like to think she's watching somehow, laughing at how I turned from isolated king to doting father-to-be in less than a year." "I don't think she's laughing," Sarah said. "I think she's proud. You didn't let grief destroy you. You found a way back to life." "We found a way back," Cale corrected. "Together." They stayed in the garden until the stars came out. Worthless was now a queen. Carrying the worthless was now a queen. Carrying the heir to the kingdom. The king who'd been lost to grief was now planning for tomorrow, with hope instead of dread. And in a small square in the royal city, a memorial statue was erected, not to a great battle or a famous ruler, but to second chances. It depicted an Omega and an Alpha, hands clasped, standing together against the world. The plaque read, "From ashes we rise." And rise they did. Together. Always.